Welcome back to Advice for Grad Students. I'm your host, Phil Haun, and with me today is fellow, well, she's not quite yet an alum, but hopefully soon will be, Eleanor Freund, who's going to be talking to us about the Wednesday MIT SSP seminars, the advantages, the opportunities, and the threats involved. So Eleanor, welcome to Advice for Grad Students.
It's great to be here.
And why did you pick this daunting topic of the Wednesday SSP seminar?
Yeah, so I picked this topic because I think the Wednesday seminars are a pillar of the security studies program at MIT and a key part of academic culture in the program. But I think that first and second years are often tempted to prioritize other responsibilities over it. And this was certainly my experience. So when you have a PSET due and several papers to write and hundreds of pages of reading to finish, and everything seems like it's on fire when you're in coursework, it's very tempting to find a little flexibility in your schedule by skipping the Wednesday seminar. And I want to outline why I think it's actually a valuable use of your time, and also how you can make the most out of the hour and a half when every minute of your time counts.
Okay. All right. So let's just get into it. What's your approach to the seminars?
Yeah, so I think there are three overarching reasons to value the Wednesday seminar. So the first has to do with the content of the seminar. The second has to do with professionalization. And then the third has to do with connections. So on the first, the content of the seminar, it really is a chance to see people present cutting edge research in the field, which is, from a substantive perspective, really important and a great learning opportunity. And I think that you can make the most of the seminar by being prepared beforehand. So reading what is being presented if it's publicly available, or reading the presenter's other published work, and also reading some of the other research that has been published on this topic. And I think that you can think about how the research connects to your own research interests or how it connects to classes that you're taking, and situate the presentation that you're going to see in a larger context. That's very helpful. And it will also be helpful later on when you're, referencing this presentation later on. So second, I think the Wednesday seminar is an important professionalization opportunity for students. So presenting research is a key part of the job of an academic, and something that all graduate students are expected to learn how to do. So keep track of what you like and dislike about presentations that you see in the Wednesday seminars. Which presentations are well received, which are not well received, and why? What are the differences between the two? Another thing to think about, how are people phrasing their questions to the presenters? And what questions are most helpful to the research and to the presenter? Which questions generate eye rolls or disinterest in the audience? Those are key things that you should be thinking about. And then another thing that I would really track is how presenters respond to critical feedback or pushback on their argument. What are the effective strategies for responding to skepticism from the audience, and which ones are not? And then finally, from a research perspective, what are the common issues that they're confronting in their research, and how have they attempted to surmount them? Because graduate students will often face similar problems in the context of their own research, and it can be helpful to think through how other scholars are addressing those issues. So all of these questions are ones that students should really think about while they're in the Wednesday seminars, and which will come up again and again during graduate school. And then the final point I would make is that the Wednesday seminar is a really great way to connect to other people in the community. When you are a first or second year graduate student, this is one of the few times that you'll be in the same room as senior graduate students, research fellows, military fellows, or the professors you aren't taking classes with. And it's also one of the key ways that the community will get to know you when you're new to the program. So I would really recommend that you take advantage of this. Really make an effort to talk to people who you haven't previously interacted with, and try not to do what is the most comfortable thing, which is just interact with your cohort and sit with your friends in the Wednesday seminar. It's really not a great use of your time. During coursework, it's also one of the few places that you'll have direct access to people who are not in the MIT community. So it's really great for making connections to a wider academic community. And if you're interested in the topic being presented and it relates directly to your research, I would really encourage students to go to the lunch as well. But be prepared to engage in the lunch if you do. As tempting as it may be, do not sign up for every single lunch just because there's a free lunch involved. Really be selective about what you want to attend, and then be prepared to engage when you do. And then finally, I think it's worth saying a note about the culture of the events and the culture of MIT. So SSP has a reputation for producing really rigorous first-rate research, but also being a political science department that is constructive and generally friendly to people. And so I think that students should aspire to reflect these elements of the culture as well. Questions and engagement should always come from a genuinely curious and constructive place. I think asking gotcha questions that will demonstrate your own intellectual prowess is really not the way to go. I think it's not helpful to the person presenting, and it's less impressive than people may think it comes across as. And remember that presenting is also a very stressful experience for people, and that the person who is presenting may well be in a job talk that you give one day. Be humble, be friendly, be constructive. It doesn't mean that you can't engage with the research or be critical, but make sure that your criticism is constructive and that what goes around often comes around in a profession like ours, which is very small. And I will leave it there.
All right. Well, that is some really great advice. Once again, I've had 3 questions to ask, and you answered all 3 of them before I could get to it. I thought your comments on the lunch was spot on. What I really like is your active approach to the seminar series. And so I want to hone in on one aspect, which is the question that you ask. What was your strategy or tactics in terms of asking questions? Because that's one way that graduate students can really become known, by asking good questions.
Sure. So I think there were 2 strategies that I would take generally. So one would be to ask a question about how the research relates to the larger debates in the field, and to kind of draw that out more from the presenter if they hadn't really made that clear. And I think this is great for graduate students too, because you're in the process of putting that picture together for yourself. And then I think the second thing that would be a really good question and also helpful to the speaker is to ask about elements of the research that are fixable problems potentially, but that the author may not have considered. So I think that sometimes people will ask questions about research problems that are really not fixable. So for example, like archives in a certain place aren't open, but you ask why they didn't go to the archives. That's not really helpful. And so I think really thinking about, can you find elements of the work that are shortcomings but still fixable by the author, and then focus on raising those as questions to them. I think those are the ones that are well received and honestly helpful to the presenter.
Okay, and I had one other question, which is, you're not the only one asking the question. So what kind of strategies did you use when you had your name on the list and somebody else asked your question, or you found the response to another question maybe more interesting than your original question?
Well, if somebody else asks your question and you don't have another one that you want to ask, normally I would have like a list of 5 questions, and you pick your favorite one and then you ask that one. You can either go to another question that you have as a backup, or you can just say, my question was asked and answered, thank you, and yield the time to somebody else. So I think that's always an option. And then if there's something that's brought up in a previous question and answer round, you can always put 2 fingers up if you have a question that directly relates to that point, and ask a follow-up question on that point. I would say that privilege can be abused, so be careful with it, and make sure that you're asking the questions that you care about the most, and understand that if you ask a 2-finger, you may not end up asking your actual question. So just keep that in mind when you're asking follow-ups.
Okay, and finally, I still remember how the first couple of MIT SSP seminars, I was overwhelmed by the level of discussion and interaction. And I actually ended up raising my hand without a question, because I knew I would never raise my hand otherwise. Do you have any reflections as far as a first or second year grad student, how to approach this just from an emotional level?
Sure, I think so. I think it can be very intimidating to ask questions in that kind of environment. And I think the first thing I would say is, if you can ask questions that relate to the topics that you're currently discussing in your classes, it is likely that you have read more and have engaged with that material more recently than most other people in the room. So really trust yourself and know that you are asking questions that are relevant, and that you do know what you're talking about. And the second thing is that, the whole process of coursework is about learning how to ask questions and how to critique other people's work. And a lot of this comes out very early in graduate school in the first couple of weeks. So I think most students do have a sense of the questions that are appropriate to ask because they've already asked those questions as a course of discussion in class. So I guess my advice would really be trust yourself. If you're nervous about the experience, which I think is completely understandable and most students are, write your question out line by line so that you have it and you can, if they call on you and you totally forget what you're supposed to say, you can reference that and then go for it. I think you have nothing to lose. So.
Okay, well, great. Well, the time is out, but I have to say this is one of my favorite sessions. So to you first and second year grad students, there was a lot packed in there, but go out there and ask good questions on Wednesdays. Thanks, Eleanor.
Thank you.